Sometimes the people we judge in a single glance are the very ones who quietly built the world beneath our feet. Rain drummed steadily against the towering glass entrance of the Grand Sterling Hotel, turning the marble driveway into a mirror of blurred headlights and silver reflections as guests hurried beneath polished awnings while valets rushed from one luxury vehicle to the next. Inside, the lobby glowed with warm chandeliers, fresh white orchids, and the gentle melody of a grand piano, every detail carefully designed to make strangers feel welcome. Yet on that particular evening the building seemed to have forgotten the meaning of its own promise. Ethan Brooks stepped through the revolving door carrying a small overnight bag in one hand while his other arm rested gently around his 10-year-old daughter, Lily, whose tired eyes and flushed cheeks told the story of a long day filled with airports, delayed flights, and too many hours without proper rest. His jeans were damp from the rain, his brown jacket showed signs of years of careful use, and his boots carried the dust of travel instead of the shine expected by the wealthy guests surrounding him. He noticed Lily shiver ever so slightly and smiled with quiet reassurance. "Just a few more minutes, sweetheart. Then you can get some sleep." She nodded weakly, forcing a brave smile because she knew her father worried enough already. Ethan approached the front desk where a young receptionist barely looked up before her polite smile disappeared. Her eyes drifted from his worn jacket to his weathered duffel bag, then back to the growing line of elegantly dressed guests waiting behind him. "Can I help you?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already hoped the answer would be no. Ethan offered a calm smile. "Reservation for Brooks. One room for tonight." Her fingers tapped across the keyboard before she frowned. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't see anything available." Ethan glanced toward the large display behind her advertising luxury suites with vacancies still listed for the evening. "Could you check once more?" he asked gently. "We've had a very long trip, and my daughter isn't feeling well." The receptionist sighed softly, pressing a few more keys with visible impatience before shaking her head again. "Like I said, we're fully booked." Behind Ethan, someone muttered that the line was being held up. Another guest adjusted an expensive suitcase and quietly laughed. Lily leaned against her father's shoulder, suddenly embarrassed by the attention gathering around them. Ethan noticed every glance but refused to let frustration touch his voice. He simply rested his hand against Lily's back, comforting her with the same quiet steadiness that had carried them through every difficult season since losing the woman they both loved. Across the lobby, a young trainee named Emily watched from the concierge desk, her instincts telling her something about the situation didn't feel right. She had seen demanding guests, dishonest guests, and impatient guests, but this father standing calmly in the middle of the elegant lobby looked different. He wasn't asking for special treatment. He wasn't raising his voice. He only wanted a safe place where his daughter could rest. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, looked at the screen for only a second, then slipped it away again without making a call. His eyes slowly traveled across the magnificent lobby with an expression almost impossible to read, not anger, not disappointment, but something much quieter, as though he were remembering why every stone, every light, every smiling portrait on those walls had once been placed there in the first place. The receptionist folded her hands neatly across the polished counter, as though the conversation had already ended. "I am sorry, sir, but there is nothing else I can do." Ethan looked at her for another quiet moment, his expression unchanged. "Would you mind checking under my full name one more time?" he asked gently. "Ethan Brooks." She sighed, typed a little harder than before, then leaned back in her chair. "It does not matter what name you give me. We do not have a room available for someone without a confirmed reservation." Ethan nodded slowly, neither arguing nor raising his voice. Lily tugged softly on his sleeve. "Daddy, I am okay. We can find somewhere else." He knelt beside her, brushing a damp strand of blonde hair away from her forehead. "You deserve a warm bed tonight, kiddo." His voice remained calm enough that only she could hear it. Emily watched the exchange from across the lobby, unable to ignore the uneasy feeling growing inside her. Something about the father did not fit the picture everyone else seemed determined to paint. Most frustrated travelers became impatient within minutes. This man carried himself with unusual composure, even as strangers quietly judged him. Before Emily could step closer, the sound of polished dress shoes echoed across the marble floor. Michael Grant, the evening operations manager, approached with practiced confidence. His tailored navy suit looked flawless beneath the chandelier light, and the silver name badge on his lapel reflected years of carefully cultivated professionalism. He stopped beside the receptionist and offered Ethan a smile that never reached his eyes. "Good evening. I understand there seems to be some confusion." Ethan stood. "Not confusion. I simply need a room for my daughter. She is exhausted." Michael glanced briefly at Lily before returning his attention to Ethan's worn jacket. "Sir, this is one of the busiest weekends of the season. Every available suite has already been assigned." Ethan quietly pointed toward the digital display behind the desk where several premium rooms still appeared as available. Michael barely looked at it. "Those rooms are reserved for preferred guests." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Preferred guests?" Michael answered without hesitation. "Guests with qualifying memberships and executive privileges." Several people waiting nearby exchanged knowing smiles. One businessman whispered to his companion, "That is a polite way of saying this place is out of his price range." Soft laughter followed. Lily lowered her eyes toward the polished floor. Ethan noticed her embarrassment immediately. He gently squeezed her shoulder before looking back at Michael. "Are you saying that empty rooms cannot be rented tonight?" Michael crossed his arms. "I am saying this hotel follows certain service standards." Ethan let the words settle in the air without challenging them. The piano continued playing somewhere beyond the grand staircase while rain tapped steadily against the towering windows. The contrast between the peaceful music and the growing discomfort at the front desk seemed almost surreal. Emily finally stepped forward. "Sir," she said carefully to Michael, "perhaps I could check another inventory screen. Sometimes the executive block does not update right away." Michael's polite smile disappeared. "That will not be necessary." Emily hesitated. "I only thought perhaps—" "Return to your station, Emily." She obeyed, though her heart sank as she walked away. Ethan watched the exchange without saying a word. His eyes lingered on the young employee for only a second before returning to Michael. "She was only trying to help." Michael straightened his tie. "Our staff knows exactly what they are doing," Ethan answered quietly. "The best employees usually do." For the first time, Michael seemed slightly unsettled by the remark, but only for a moment. He recovered quickly. "Sir, if you cannot provide confirmation for a reservation, I am going to have to ask you to clear the lobby so we may continue assisting our guests." Ethan looked around the magnificent entrance hall, taking in the polished brass railings, the fresh floral arrangements, the carefully chosen artwork, and the welcoming words engraved into the marble wall that read, "Every guest leaves as family." His gaze rested on that sentence longer than anyone realized. Then he smiled almost sadly. "That is still a beautiful promise," he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. He reached into his jacket pocket, removed his phone once again, unlocked the screen, and typed only 6 simple words before placing it back inside his pocket. He did not make a call. He did not mention names. He did not threaten anyone. The message read, "Please do not interrupt. I want to see everything." Emily returned to the concierge desk, but her attention never drifted far from the father standing quietly near the front entrance. She had worked at the Grand Sterling Hotel for only 3 months, yet she had already memorized the rhythm of the lobby. Wealthy guests arrived, expecting perfection. Families arrived hoping for comfort. Business travelers arrived looking for efficiency. This man had arrived carrying something much simpler. He wanted a place where his little girl could close her eyes without worrying about tomorrow. Lily shifted her weight and leaned gently against her father. Her cheeks had grown slightly redder, and the long day was finally catching up with her. Ethan unzipped his weathered overnight bag and carefully removed a small knitted blanket. He wrapped it around her shoulders with practiced tenderness before kneeling beside her once again. "How are you doing now?" he asked softly. Lily managed a tired smile. "Better because you are here." Ethan chuckled quietly. That is my favorite answer. She looked toward the sparkling chandeliers hanging above the lobby. This hotel is beautiful. Ethan followed her eyes upward. It was built to make people feel safe. She nodded without realizing how much those words meant to him. Across the lobby, a middle-aged couple waiting for their room overheard the conversation. The wife whispered, "He seems like a good father." Her husband shrugged. "Maybe. But if he cannot afford this place, he should not have brought his daughter here." Emily heard the remark and felt uncomfortable. She had grown up in a small town where her own father repaired school buses for nearly 30 years. His clothes often carried grease stains that never completely disappeared, but she remembered how strangers sometimes mistook hard work for failure. Watching Ethan stand there reminded her of those memories. Michael continued helping arriving guests, as though nothing unusual had happened. Every smile he offered seemed polished. Every greeting sounded rehearsed. Yet every few moments his eyes drifted back toward Ethan, almost irritated that the quiet father had not simply walked away. A luxury sport utility vehicle stopped beneath the front entrance canopy, and a family dressed for an evening gala entered the lobby surrounded by designer luggage. The receptionist immediately welcomed them with warmth that had been missing only minutes earlier. Complimentary refreshments were offered. Belle's staff hurried forward. Smiles appeared effortlessly. Lily watched the difference in treatment without saying a word. Ethan noticed her expression. "Remember something for me," he said gently. "The way people treat you says more about them than it does about you." She looked up at him. "Even when it hurts?" Ethan nodded. "Especially then." Emily lowered her eyes for a moment because the simple sentence carried more dignity than any customer service seminar she had ever attended. She quietly opened another reservation screen on her computer despite Michael's earlier instruction. Her fingers moved carefully through the executive inventory. Within seconds she found what she suspected. 6 premium suites remained vacant. They had not been assigned to anyone. Her heart skipped. She printed the availability report and walked cautiously toward Michael. "Sir," she whispered, making certain no guests could hear. "There are still 6 open suites." Michael glanced at the paper only briefly before folding it in half. "Those are not available." Emily frowned. "But the system says they are ready." Michael's voice became firmer. "Do not confuse operational inventory with guest inventory. Return to your desk." Emily hesitated. "Should we at least explain that to him?" Michael looked toward Ethan standing patiently beside Lily. "No. This conversation is over." Emily slowly returned to her station, but something inside her refused to settle. The hotel handbook she had studied during orientation repeated one sentence more than any other. "Every guest deserves respect before recognition." She could almost hear her training instructor repeating those words. Yet the lobby unfolding before her seemed to be operating under an entirely different rule. Ethan stood silently beside the enormous fireplace where golden flames danced behind polished glass. The warmth reached Lily first, and she smiled faintly as she stretched her hands toward it. Ethan gently rested his hand on her shoulder while quietly studying the people moving through the lobby. His expression remained peaceful, but behind his calm eyes every detail was being noticed. Every greeting. Every decision. Every moment someone chose. Appearance over character. Somewhere beyond the rain-covered windows, headlights slowly turned into the hotel entrance before disappearing beneath the covered drive, and although no one inside the lobby realized it yet, the evening was about to change in ways none of them could have imagined. The steady rhythm of rain outside blended with the quiet crackle of the fireplace, wrapping the lobby in an almost peaceful atmosphere that stood in sharp contrast to the tension gathering beneath its polished surface. Ethan remained beside Lily, who had finally settled into one of the leather chairs near the fire. She rested her head against the blanket wrapped around her shoulders and closed her eyes for a brief moment. "Do not fall asleep just yet," Ethan whispered with a gentle smile. "We are almost finished here." She opened one eye and smiled back. "You always say that when something important is about to happen." Ethan laughed softly. "Maybe because it usually is." Across the lobby, Michael folded his arms as he watched the father refuse to leave. Every passing minute made him more uncomfortable, not because Ethan had caused a disturbance, but because his calm presence quietly exposed everyone else's impatience. The receptionist leaned toward Michael and spoke under her breath. "Should I call security?" Michael glanced toward Ethan once more. "If he refuses to leave after I ask again, yes." Emily overheard the conversation and felt her stomach tighten. Nothing about the father suggested danger. He had not argued. He had not raised his voice. He had thanked every employee who had spoken to him, even those who had dismissed him. She could not understand why kindness seemed to make everyone more suspicious instead of more compassionate. Ethan slowly reached into his pocket once again and looked at his phone. A single reply had appeared beneath the message he had sent only minutes earlier. "Understood. Arriving shortly." He locked the screen without changing his expression and slipped the phone back into his jacket. Lily looked up at him. "Was that Uncle Nathan?" she asked quietly. Ethan smiled. "No, sweetheart. Someone from work?" He gently shook his head. "Just someone who needed to know what was happening." She accepted the answer without another question because she had learned long ago that her father never spoke more than necessary. Michael approached once again, stopping a respectful distance away. "Sir, I have already explained our position." Ethan stood slowly so Lily could remain resting in the chair. "You have. Then I am asking you one final time to leave the property." Ethan nodded politely. "May I ask you one question before I do?" Michael hesitated before answering. "One question." Ethan's voice remained warm and almost conversational. "If a guest arrives tired, carrying a sick child, and asks only for a place to rest, what should your first responsibility be?" Michael answered without hesitation, repeating the language from countless training sessions. "To provide excellent service within hotel policy." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Within policy." "Correct." Ethan smiled faintly. "And where does kindness fit?" Michael looked briefly uncomfortable before replying. "Kindness is important when appropriate." Ethan let a few seconds pass. Interesting answer. Neither man spoke after that. The silence itself seemed louder than any argument could have been. Emily noticed several nearby guests had stopped pretending not to watch. Even the pianist glanced toward the front desk before quietly continuing another familiar melody. An elderly woman seated near the lounge slowly stood and approached Lily with a warm smile. "Would you like a cup of hot tea, sweetheart?" Before Lily could answer, Ethan smiled gratefully. "That is very thoughtful, ma'am, but thank you. She will be all right." The woman nodded. "She has good manners." Ethan looked at Lily with quiet pride. "She has a good heart." The woman smiled before returning to her seat, leaving behind only a simple reminder that compassion required neither permission nor authority. Outside, the rain began to slow. A line of headlights turned beneath the covered entrance, followed by another, and then another. Unlike the expensive luxury vehicles arriving throughout the evening, these black sedans carried no luggage on their roofs and displayed no hotel logos on their doors. The valets exchanged curious glances as the first car came to a smooth stop beneath the awning. One driver stepped out, opened the rear passenger door, and waited respectfully without saying a word. Inside the lobby, no one noticed at first. Michael was still watching Ethan. The receptionist continued helping guests. Emily quietly looked toward the entrance, sensing something had changed long before anyone else realized it. Ethan did not turn around. He simply rested one reassuring hand on Lily's shoulder and looked once more at the words carved into the marble wall. "Every guest leaves as family." Then, almost too softly for anyone nearby to hear, he whispered, "Let us find out whether those words still mean something. I can't produce a single 5,660-word response in one message because it exceeds my maximum response length. I can, however, continue the story in the exact same style, maintaining the same characters and continuity, one uninterrupted block enclosed in a single pair of, no line breaks, no headings, no commentary, American English, YouTube-safe narration, voice-over-friendly wording, but it will need to be split across multiple responses due to length limits. The first black sedan came to a gentle stop beneath the covered entrance, followed by two more that moved with quiet precision instead of unnecessary display. The valet team instinctively straightened their jackets, expecting another group of executives arriving for an evening event. One driver stepped forward and opened the rear door with practiced respect, but instead of hurrying inside, the passengers paused as though waiting for permission that only one person could give. Inside the lobby, the soft piano melody continued, yet the atmosphere had changed. Conversations grew quieter. Even the clinking of glasses from the lounge seemed to fade beneath a growing sense that something important was unfolding. Emily noticed it first. She watched the group through the rain-speckled glass doors and recognized several faces from employee newsletters and annual leadership broadcasts. Her heart began to race. Those people rarely visited individual properties without advance notice. Michael remained focused on Ethan, unaware that the evening was beginning to move beyond his control. "Sir," he said with growing impatience, "I have asked you repeatedly to leave." Ethan looked at him calmly. "I heard you every time." "Then why are you still here?" Michael asked. Ethan glanced briefly toward Lily, who had finally drifted into a light sleep beside the fireplace with the knitted blanket tucked carefully around her shoulders. "Because my daughter deserves to wake up somewhere she feels safe." Michael opened his mouth to respond, but before another word could leave him, the revolving door turned slowly. 3 senior executives entered the lobby, followed by the company's chief legal officer and the regional director of operations. Every employee near the entrance immediately recognized them. The receptionist stood so quickly that her chair rolled backward. Bell's staff instinctively adjusted their uniforms. Emily felt her pulse quicken. Michael's confident expression changed into one of surprise before settling into a rehearsed smile. "Good evening," he said as he hurried toward them. "Welcome to the Grand Sterling." The regional director acknowledged him with a polite nod but continued walking without slowing down. His eyes never left Ethan Brooks. The entire lobby seemed to hold its breath as the executives crossed the marble floor. Guests quietly stepped aside without understanding why. The pianist stopped playing in the middle of a familiar melody. Rain continued tapping softly against the tall windows, filling the silence that suddenly seemed almost sacred. When the group reached Ethan, the regional director smiled warmly and extended both hands. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks. We came as quickly as we could." Ethan shook his hand with the same quiet humility he had shown everyone else that evening. "Thank you for coming." Lily slowly opened her eyes, still sleepy, and smiled when she recognized one of the visitors. "Hi, Mr. Collins." The executive bent slightly to her level. "Hello, Lily. I hope you are feeling better." She nodded with a tired smile. "A little." Behind them, Michael stood frozen. His eyes moved from Ethan to the executives and back again, searching for an explanation that refused to appear. The receptionist covered her mouth in disbelief. Emily felt every piece of the evening suddenly fall into place. Ethan had never been waiting for rescue. He had been waiting for the truth to reveal itself. The regional director turned toward Michael with a composed expression. "Would you please explain why Mr. Brooks and his daughter have not been given a room?" Michael swallowed before answering. There was a reservation issue." Ethan spoke softly before the explanation could continue. "Please do not interrupt him. I would like everyone to hear exactly what happened." No anger entered his voice. No satisfaction crossed his face. Only disappointment remained, quiet and unmistakable. The executives exchanged brief glances before nodding. For the first time that evening, every person in the lobby understood that the calm father they had quietly judged was not an ordinary traveler at all. Yet the greatest surprise was not that powerful people knew his name. It was the respect in their voices when they spoke it. For several long seconds, no one moved. The only sound inside the lobby was the gentle patter of rain against the towering windows and the faint crackle of the fireplace beside Lily's chair. Michael felt every pair of eyes settle on him. His confidence, so carefully displayed only moments earlier, began to dissolve beneath the quiet attention of the executives standing before him. Richard Collins, the regional director, spoke with measured calm. Michael, I asked a simple question. Michael cleared his throat. Mr. Brooks arrived without what appeared to be a valid reservation. We followed standard procedures. Ethan remained silent, allowing the explanation to continue. Richard nodded once. Very well. Let us verify the procedures. He looked toward the chief legal officer. Please request the security recordings from the moment Mr. Brooks entered the lobby. Michael blinked. The recordings? Yes, Richard replied. The complete recordings. Emily hurried toward the security office before anyone even asked her to. She returned only a few minutes later with the security supervisor carrying a tablet connected to the hotel's surveillance system. The supervisor looked uncertain as he handed it to Richard. Everything from the last 45 minutes is ready. Richard placed the tablet on the front desk where everyone could see. The first recording showed Ethan entering through the revolving door with Lily wrapped beneath his arm as rainwater dripped from his jacket. Guests hurried past without noticing them. The second camera captured Ethan waiting patiently while the receptionist finished another conversation. The third showed him speaking politely, smiling gently, and never once raising his voice. Every sentence was calm. Every request was respectful. The next recording displayed the reservation screen that Emily had quietly checked earlier. 6 premium suites remained available throughout the entire conversation. Michael lowered his eyes. Emily looked down as well, though for a very different reason. She finally understood why Ethan had never argued. He had trusted the truth to speak more clearly than anger ever could. Richard turned toward the receptionist. Were these rooms available? She hesitated before whispering. Yes, sir. Why were they not offered? Tears gathered in her eyes. I assumed. Her voice broke before she finished. Richard waited patiently. You assumed what? She swallowed hard. I assumed he could not afford them. Silence settled over the lobby once again. Ethan did not react. He simply looked toward Lily, who had quietly awakened and was listening without fully understanding why everyone suddenly seemed so serious. Richard faced Michael again. Did you verify the reservation personally? Michael answered honestly. No. Did you verify the executive inventory? No. Did you ask why Mr. Brooks requested another search? No. Each answer landed more heavily than the one before it. The chief legal officer quietly made notes, without interrupting. Several guests who had witnessed the entire evening exchanged uncomfortable glances. The businessman who had joked earlier slowly looked away, unable to meet Ethan's eyes. The elderly woman who had offered Lily tea folded her hands together with quiet sadness. Ethan finally stepped forward. His voice remained as steady as it had been from the beginning. Richard. Yes, Mr. Brooks. Do you know what disappoints me most? Richard answered carefully. I believe I do, but I would rather hear it from you. Ethan looked around the magnificent lobby, taking in the polished marble, the glowing chandeliers, the smiling portraits of employees displayed along the far wall, and finally the words engraved near the entrance. Every guest leaves as family. No one recognized me, Ethan said softly. That does not matter. Recognition should never be required for kindness. His eyes rested gently on the receptionist, who could no longer hide her tears. What matters is that my daughter was judged before anyone learned her name. Lily reached for her father's hand. Ethan smiled warmly at her before continuing. Tonight was never about ownership. It was never about authority. It was about whether our values still exist when no one important appears to be watching. Richard slowly nodded, understanding the full weight of those words. Around them, the lobby remained completely still. Every employee realized they were no longer witnessing an investigation into policy. They were witnessing a lesson about character, delivered by the quietest person in the room. Richard allowed the silence to linger because no speech could have carried more weight than the truth everyone had just witnessed with their own eyes. The glowing chandeliers reflected across the polished marble floor, while the rain outside finally softened into a gentle mist. The atmosphere that had once felt elegant now felt deeply personal, as though the hotel itself were waiting to hear what its founder would say next. Michael slowly lowered his head. "Mr. Brooks," he began quietly, "there is no excuse for the decisions I made tonight. I judged before I listened. I assumed before I verified. I failed both your family and the standards this hotel was built upon." The receptionist wiped away her tears. "I did the same," she admitted. "I looked at your clothes instead of your character. I forgot why I wanted this job in the first place." Ethan listened without interrupting. His expression remained thoughtful rather than angry. Lily gently squeezed his hand and looked up at him. "Daddy, are they going to be all right?" Her innocent question echoed through the still lobby with surprising power. Ethan smiled softly before kneeling beside her. "That depends on what they choose to become after tonight." He stood once more and faced Richard. "Everyone expects consequences. That is easy. What is difficult is creating change." Richard nodded. "What would you like us to do?" Ethan looked toward Emily, who had remained quietly near the concierge desk throughout the evening. "Before I answer, I have a question for someone else." Emily looked startled as Ethan smiled warmly at her. "Why did you check the reservation system after your manager told you not to?" Emily hesitated before answering honestly. "Because something did not feel right. My father always taught me that if kindness and policy ever disagree, I should look twice before deciding which one is wrong." Ethan's smile grew slightly. "And what did you find?" 6 available suites," she answered. "Then why did you not remain silent?" Emily looked around the lobby before replying. "Because I did not want a little girl to believe she was unwelcome." Lily smiled shyly at her. Ethan turned back to Richard. "There is your future manager." Emily's eyes widened. "Sir?" Richard smiled. "I think Mr. Brooks has always been very good at recognizing leadership." Ethan shook his head gently. "Not leadership. Character. Leadership grows from character, never the other way around." Michael quietly stepped forward. "If my employment ends tonight, I understand." Ethan studied him for several seconds. "Do you remember the first interview you ever had with this company?" Michael looked surprised by the question. "Yes." "Why did you want to work here?" Michael answered without hesitation. "Because this company believed hospitality could change people's lives." Ethan nodded slowly. "When did you stop believing that?" Michael closed his eyes briefly. "Somewhere between performance reports, revenue goals, and trying to impress people above me. I stopped seeing the guests and started seeing categories." Ethan's voice remained calm. "That answer took more courage than your earlier excuses." Richard looked toward Ethan. "What is your decision?" Ethan glanced once more around the magnificent lobby. Employees stood shoulder to shoulder beside guests who only an hour earlier had been strangers. Everyone was listening. Everyone was learning. "The receptionist will be suspended with full pay while completing customer care retraining," Ethan said. "Not because she deserves comfort, but because she deserves the opportunity to become better." Tears filled her eyes again. Ethan continued. "Michael will step down from management immediately." Michael accepted the words with quiet dignity. Before disappointment could settle across his face, Ethan added, "For 90 days. Michael looked up in confusion. "During those 90 days, you will work every guest-facing position in this hotel. Front desk, bell service, housekeeping, concierge, breakfast dining. You will learn every challenge your employees face before leading them again." Richard smiled faintly. He understood exactly what Ethan was doing. Ethan looked directly at Michael. "If, after those 90 days, your coworkers believe you have earned their trust, you may return to management. Respect cannot be assigned. It must be rebuilt." No one applauded. No one celebrated. The lesson was too meaningful for that. Instead, the lobby remained wrapped in a profound silence, the kind that appears only when pride gives way to humility and when justice chooses wisdom over revenge. Nearly 1 year later, the Grand Sterling Hotel looked much the same from the outside. The glass entrance still reflected the morning sun. The marble floors still shimmered beneath elegant chandeliers. Fresh flowers still welcomed travelers from every corner of the country. Yet anyone who worked there would quietly tell you that the building itself had changed in a way no renovation could ever accomplish. The transformation had begun not with expensive furniture or redesigned guest suites, but with one rainy evening when a tired father carrying his daughter reminded everyone that hospitality begins long before a room key is handed across. A counter. A new bronze plaque now stood beside the front entrance where every guest could see it before taking another step. The words were simple. Respect comes before recognition. Every guest deserves dignity. Visitors often paused to read it without knowing the story behind those sentences. Employees knew. They remembered. Every orientation session for new staff now began with that message instead of revenue goals or service rankings. Emily, now serving as the hotel's guest experience manager, welcomed each new employee personally. She never started with company policies. Instead, she asked one question. When someone walks through these doors carrying a burden you cannot see, how do you want them to remember the way you looked at them? There was never only one correct answer, but every conversation pointed toward the same truth. Character always comes before appearance. Michael completed every one of the 90 days Ethan required. He greeted guests before sunrise as a doorman. He carried heavy luggage through summer heat as a bell attendant. He folded towels alongside housekeeping teams. He served breakfast to families on busy weekends. He listened far more than he spoke. Some days were exhausting. Some moments were humbling. Yet little by little, the employees who had once worked beneath him began working beside him. They saw a different man emerging, one who learned every name, thanked every coworker, and apologized whenever he made a mistake. At the end of the 90 days, Ethan never asked for performance reports. Instead, he quietly visited the employee break room and asked a single question. Would you trust Michael to lead you again? The answer did not come from executives. It came from housekeepers, servers, maintenance workers, front desk clerks, and valets. They all answered yes. Not because he had been perfect, but because he had become teachable. Ethan smiled and shook Michael's hand. Then welcome back. Michael never forgot that moment. Neither did anyone else. Lily had fully recovered and seemed taller every time she visited the hotel with her father. She knew many employees by name now, and they knew hers. She always stopped to wave at the doorman before racing toward the fireplace where she had once rested beneath her father's knitted blanket. One afternoon she asked Ethan, "Daddy, did you build this hotel because you wanted beautiful rooms?" Ethan smiled as they stood together in the bright lobby watching families arrive with laughter, grandparents reunite with grandchildren, and strangers become friends over cups of coffee. "No," he answered softly. "Beautiful rooms are easy to build. Places where people feel seen are much harder." Lily thought about that for a moment before slipping her hand into his. "I like this place better now." Ethan looked around the lobby, where employees greeted every traveler with the same warmth regardless of clothing, luggage, or appearance. He saw Emily helping an elderly couple. He saw Michael kneeling beside a little boy to show him where the complimentary cookies were waiting. He saw smiles that no longer looked rehearsed because they had become sincere. Quietly, almost to himself, Ethan whispered, "So do I." As evening settled outside and the first lights of the city shimmered across the rain-washed streets, another family stepped through the revolving door carrying worn backpacks instead of expensive suitcases. Before they reached the front desk, 3 employees were already walking toward them with genuine smiles. No one asked how much money they had. No one judged the condition of their clothes. They were welcomed simply because they had arrived. Ethan watched for another silent moment before turning toward the exit with Lily beside him. He never announced who he was. He never needed applause. His greatest success was not that people recognized the owner. It was that they no longer needed to. Sometimes the strongest legacy is not the building a person leaves behind. It is the kindness that quietly lives on after they walk away.